we have his co-author in this paper today, Soeren Henn, who will thankfully kick off the presentation, and when Jim arrives, we'll try to bring him in. Okay, Soeren, thank you very much. I mean, the floor is yours now.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. There we go. I hope you can all see this now. Yeah, so my name is Soeren Henn. I'm at the University of Chicago and at Innovations for Poverty Actions, and this is with James Robinson, also at the Harris School of the University of Chicago. The talk today is going to be about how to be optimistic about African development, Africans' latent assets. And I think we want to start this, shared the wrong screen, excuse me. We want to start this, this talk by telling you about China, not about Africa. And we want to take a step back and think about China previously to 1978. And if we think about China's situation there, it really had terrible 200 years. In the second half of the 18th century, the Qing fiscal system fell apart, the Grand Canal silted up, the grain system of famine relief collapsed, and there was rampant corruption. Then if we move forward in the 19th century, the country was humiliated by European powers, forced to buy opium, and ravaged by the Taiping Rebellion. Millions died. And then we go to the 20th century, the imperial state disintegrated, there was a civil war, the communist revolution, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, and again, millions of people starved and were murdered. And given this situation, if you were to look at China in 1978, I think few would have predicted what turned out to be the most rapid experience of economic growth in human history. But it turned out that underneath all of this chaos, bad governance and institutional failures, China had what we call important latent assets. And an obvious one of this is the norm of meritocracy. If you look at Confucius, you see that promote those who are worthy and talented. China was the one part of the world where pre-modern elites were selected via competitive examinations. If you wanted to be in the civil service, you had to pass an exam. That was very competitive. And this principle, this norm of meritocracy, is a very powerful sociological principle on which to base entrepreneurship, innovation, and rapid economic growth. Now, the comparison to Africa is that Africa has had more than 200 bad years. One would argue 500 terrible years. As long as 500 years ago, the kingdom of the Congo had already been warped by the Portuguese into a state based on slave exports. The organization of African society then made the continent vulnerable to a series of disastrous encounters with the forces of globalization. The negative impact of the slave trade on societies, trust, we have the work by Nathan Nunn and Leonard Wonchkon, on institutions, the way that states were based on the slave trade and the judicial functions of the states. The negative impact of colonialism then came the creation of artificial states, artificial boundaries, land expropriation, and obvious racism. And then the Cold War after independence. Regimes were propped up that didn't have democratic basis. Rebellions were promoted, all things that we know very well. And then there's predatory mining companies nowadays that again undermine judicial functions, institutions, and land holding across the continent. But could it be that, like China, Africa has latent assets in the same way that China had? And in this presentation, we're going to argue that yes, there are several assets that Africa has that might be a good reason for us to be optimistic about Africa's development once certain institutional problems are solved. And in this talk, we're going to emphasize three types of advantages that Africa has relative to many other parts of the world. First, unlike many hierarchical societies in South Asia and Latin America, Africa's society is more achievement-based. This is critical for entrepreneurship. It's not the same as China, but it's the type of sociological advantage that China had, if you remember the Confucius quote I mentioned earlier. Second, Africans are cosmopolitan. They speak more languages than anywhere else in the world, and because of the diversity of Africa, they're used to dealing with differences, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, religious. And this gives them a huge advantage in negotiating a globalized world. A good comparison would be English people or German people. English people, most people just speak English, right? Germans might speak another language, but it's not the same diversity that we find on the African continent. Third, Africans have a long tradition of resisting authority and are deeply skeptical of power. Nobody in Africa kind of believes in this charismatic populist ideology that you might find, for example, in Latin America. And this is a good basis for building inclusive and accountable political systems later. So let me go into each of these three assets in turn and give you some kind of descriptive evidence that we've put together. So first, let's look at this idea of achievement and social mobility from a cross-national evidence perspective. We illustrate our first argument with some striking data on perceptions of social mobility and attitudes toward hard work. Since the work of Arthur Lewis in the 1950s, we know that entrepreneurship is a key part of economic growth. And it's critical that people with ideas and creativity can get to the top and are not held back by barriers or hierarchy. Social mobility is a key underpinning of development. Many surveys, for example, the Afrobarometer surveys, the Latin Barometer, contain comparable questions on people's perceptions of social mobility. And so the first one we're going to show you is that people are asked to place their parents on a 1 to 10 income scale, and then they place themselves on the same scale. So in a society with very little social mobility, so where you are the same as your parents, we would expect most observations to be on the 45 degrees line. Something like we find in Latin America. So this is Latin America, this is pooling all the respondents from 2000 to 2013. And we can see here that, the personal position, the parent position, there's a very strong correlation here. Many people on the 45 degree line. So what about Africa? The picture is actually remarkably different. Let me just quickly go forward. You can see this. It looks very different than the picture of Latin America. Much more observations off of the 45 degree line. So for Latin America, 52% of respondents view their economic score as the same as their parents, while in Africa, this figure is only 20.5%. And so just quickly the visual comparison, this is Latin America, and now we're going to see Africa. So much more dispersion for good and for bad, right? So people are better off, but people are also worse off than their parents. So only 20% have the same on the 45 degree line. How does this compare to other parts of the world? Remarkably, in this data, Africans report more mobility than anywhere else. So in Asia and Middle East, 47% of respondents view their economic score as the same as their parents. Even in the US, 40% of respondents view have the same score. And in Europe, it's 38. And so that's kind of an argument that African societies are achievement-based. There's more mobility. You're not stuck with where your parents are. So just Africa, this is now Africa compared to the United States. Again, a lot less dispersion in the United States. So that's the first piece of evidence here. Now, these surveys also are similar questions about expected mobility for your children. So the evidence I just showed you was about the comparison between you and your parents. And now this is expected mobility between you and your children. And again, even more striking is this evidence. Africa is remarkably distinct. Let's show you this. So this is Latin America, future mobility. We can see that people are more optimistic here. But in Africa, the optimism is just striking. You see, there's a lot of observations on the top of the 45 degree line, and many people, put a 10 for their children's positions. People are very optimistic about the economic potential of their children. Now, there's one big question here: is what is the connection between expected mobility and actual mobility? Looking at the literature and at kind of World Bank reports on income mobility and educational mobility, we kind of think that Africans are over-optimistic relative to actual patterns of mobility. Income mobility doesn't actually look as good in Africa as these surveys suggest. But this is not unique for Africa. This is also a characteristic that we know of the United States. We know the paper by Alestina, Stephanie Sancheva, and Eduardo Teso, where Americans, for example, are more optimistic about income mobility in America as well. And we also know from this paper that this is very important, that expected mobility shapes policy preferences, and it matters quite a bit. Now, the second piece of evidence we want to put forward here on this latent asset of hard work and achievement-based society is the return to effort. There are several surveys that ask questions about the importance of hard work, and one of them is the World Value Survey, which asks respondents to choose between, in the long run, hard work usually brings a better life, and hard work doesn't generally bring success. It's more a matter of luck and connections. So we have hard work brings success, and it's not hard work, it's luck and connections. And so people have to choose between 1, which is hard work brings a better life, and 10, it's more luck and connections. And we're going to see that a higher proportion of Africans report 1, so hard work, than anywhere else in the world. Let's look at this. This is this graph. This is going to compare the different continents: Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, North America, and New Zealand, Australia. And again, the striking fact that this red bar on the left is the highest. So Africans are the most likely to believe that hard work is going to bring them ahead. Latin Americans, on the other hand, are the most likely to think that it's not hard work, but luck and connections. Corresponding piece of evidence, again from the World Value Survey, is what values do you want to teach your children? And the World Value Survey asked a range of things such as hard work, feeling of responsibility, imagination, tolerance and respect for other people, thrift, determination, religious faith, unselfishness, obedience, self-expression. Now people can mark 5 of these that they think are important. And now let's look at the data. Again, Africa has the highest percentage of people choosing hard work as something that they want to teach their children. And compared to Latin America, 44%, for example. We have in Europe, 58, North America, 53. So Africans believe in mobility and they believe in hard work. And that's really characteristics of an achievement-based society, quite similar to kind of what Confucius said about China. Now we want to go from this kind of cross-national evidence and dig a little bit deeper in kind of elite politics. A different way, that's a different way of looking at this, is kind of the social and economic background of the elites. In a society where we think success is achievement-based, we would imagine elites to be quite diverse. And this is actually exactly what we examine when looking at elites in Nigeria, as one example we chose here. If we look at the cabinet of the latest the president now, every minister went to a different high school, mostly public schools. And we've also started looking at CEOs of all the companies listed on the Lagos Stock Exchange. And again, it's a very diverse picture, very diverse in terms of ethnicity, in terms of the high school that they went to, in terms of the university they went to, in terms of the region where they went to from the country. And we kind of want to now look at kind of their parents' background and see whether they come from different kind of elite households or other households. And just to contrast that with another case is Chile in Latin America, where James has done previous works kind of mapping CEOs and cabinets. And just looking at the first cabinet of President Sebastián Piñera, 86% of the ministers attended private schools, and more than half, so more than 43%, just came from 4 different private schools. Let me just show this visually to you. This is what African looks like. We just plotted the high schools of Nigerian presidential cabinet members. So it's quite, it's an unusual pie chart because there's no variation in any of the slices. And I guess it's a very fair pie. Everyone went to a different high school. So every different minister went to a different high school. Now contrast this to Chile. You're going to see 86% went to private schools, and 4 went to 4 specific private schools. Four specific private schools, over 43%. Just the cabinet on the left side, we have these 3 private schools: San Ignacio, Sagrados Corazones, Verbo Divino, Tabancura, 43%. And then in the business elite, it's a very similar picture. Again, more than 40% come from these 4 private schools, and the vast majority come from private schools in general. And just to contrast that again with Nigeria, very different picture. So we could take this as an argument that elites are less entrenched in Africa, and that might be a little bit surprising to people not that familiar with the continent. And it's again evidence that the society is achievement based, and you can get ahead if you're talented. One example, similar to the evidence from China, is that the Sunjata, very old epic in the Sahel region in Mali, has that you should respect talented people. That's something that's ingrained in the culture. Now, the second asset we want to talk about is what we call cosmopolitanism. And a fundamental fact about Africa is that it's political, cultural, and socially diverse, and religiously. Let's have a look at what the Jos Plateau in central Nigeria looked like when Mr. Ames got there in the early 1930s. So this is a colonial administrator and historian. This is the Jos Plateau. This is a map from his book, 1934, The Gazetteer of Plateau Province. And it marks 68 different ethnic groups in just one state in Nigeria. And so, you know, it's hard to see, but that's kind of part of the point, that all these different writings that you see in all these different arrows are different ethnic groups, 68 different ethnic groups in a very small area, and concentrated area. So Africans are used to dealing with negotiating and respecting differences. And one consequences of this is multilingualism. There are fewer monolingual people in Africa than anywhere else in the world that we have kind of found data for. And you might say maybe it's not so useful to speak Lingala or Igbo, but I mean, I would say that that's not necessarily true, but there's a possibility of language requirement, and who's better equipped to deal with globalized and polycentric world than people used to learning multiple languages and endlessly negotiating cultural differences. If you live in the Jos Plateau, you have to dealing with people from different backgrounds, both cultural, linguistically, religiously, all the time, to go to the market in your day-to-day life. And that then equips you to in a globalized world, to trade with people from other countries and backgrounds. One example for this are African traders that are very successful in China and Guangdong province, for example. And so this is the data on multilingualism that we have found comparing Africa to the United States and Europe. You can see in Africa, only 30% of people only speak one language, and almost 70% speak at least two, with over 25% speaking three or more. And if you compare that to the European Union and the United States, we can see a lot more monolingual people. In the United States, it's more than 75% actually. So it's almost the flipped graph to the African graph here. Another dimension which this experience might show up is that Africans are tolerant of others. One way we can look at this in cross-national data is religious tolerance. And here Africa looks very similar to much of the world. And it's not again, you might think of like the first image you might have of Africa, where you hear about conflicts, both religious and ethnic. But there's a lot of heterogeneity, what I'm going to show you, which, kind of the point we want to also make here, here is that Africa is not a country, as much as this talk so much that sounds like it. There's heterogeneity across the continent, but we want to point out to some kind of factors and latent assets that we see kind of across the continent. So religious tolerance by region, again, Africa scores very high. Over 80% of people kind of classified as tolerant in the World Value Survey, which is higher than North Africa and the Middle East, higher than Asia, in kind of comparative levels to Europe, Latin America, and the US, New Zealand, Australia. And just this comes now from the Afrobarometer. We can see very high religious tolerance in most of sub-Saharan Africa, and then some kind of lower levels if we look at the Sahel region, if we look at North Africa here on the right of the graph. If you think about which are the countries that score badly: Niger, Sudan, Morocco, Swaziland, Guinea, Tunisia. So it's mostly Sahel and North African countries. But so what I want you to take from this is high religious tolerance on average in Africa, which goes with our essence of cosmopolitanism, of differences that are accepted and kind of used. Another kind of fascinating piece of evidence to bring its anthropological piece of evidence comes something on the Bantu expansion, which was the historical migration of people and institutions and technologies from Western Nigeria and Cameroon throughout Central and Southern Africa. And this process was not coercive. It's not that new people came in and kind of subjugated the population, but Bantu people merged with locals, respecting the land rights of the indigenous people, separating political and ritual authority, and learning from the existing population. So there's a lot of technology and knowledge that goes back and forth between the Bantu people and the indigenous populations. This is very different if you think about Eurasia, if we think about population movements, if we think about population movement from the steppes to other parts of Europe. There was much more coercive and less of a merging going on. And one way you can see this is comparing chess versus makla. So here we have a 3D chess board, and on the other side we have makla, a game in Africa. And chess is all about obliterating your opponent. It's all about getting rid of everyone until you can get the king. On the other hand, makla is about getting the stones of the opponent and incorporating that into your stones, into your army, so to say. It's more about merging than it is about obliterating and getting rid of the opponent. And that also shows up in language. So there's this remarkable fact that in almost all African languages that we've looked at so far, the word for stranger and foreigner and the word for guest is the same. So if you're a stranger, you're also a guest. I mean, as I'm saying this, you know that this is not the same in English. This is not the same in German. It's not the same in Spanish, in French. Now we've reached all the languages that I know. But in Africa, if you look at this table, in Swahili, Amharic, Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, in Zulu, they're similar. In Xhosa, you can see there's also some similarities. Somali, Shona, Nyanya, Malagasy. In Mende, it's similar. We have a long list, more than fits on this page. Well, Afrikaans doesn't fit there, but Afrikaans is also not the typical African language, as you might know. It's the European language in many senses. So just to wrap up the second point, Africa is a very diverse continent. People speak many languages. People are tolerant. People are open to guests and foreigners. Something that we argue is going to be a good setup for the globalized economy. Now let's go to the third asset, skepticism of power. Let's start with a quote from anthropology, Mary Douglas, in her 1963 book, The Lele of Kasai. Those who have had anything to do with the Lele must have noticed the absence of anyone who could give orders with a reasonable hope of being obeyed. So if you deal with the Lele society, there's no chance that you could gain any authority because there's social constructs going on that prevent anybody from gaining authority and from having a say. There's a big skepticism. Why did the Jos Pousseau look the way it did? Well, why was the political society so small in Africa? We think that one salient reason is skepticism of political power. Images of political misbehavior are prominent in African oral history, form of the drunken king. So there are many stories of a king that misbehaves, of kings that don't do what they're supposed to do. And that is, again, kind of shows that there's a high degree of skepticism for power in society. Just to contrast that with Latin America, we know from the Mexican historian Enrique Krauss, the idea of the redeemer, that some political figure is going to come and kind of save society and politics, that kind of shows up again and again in Latin American politics and populism. They are the Lulas of the world. The Mexican president right now, is this idea that this person is going to come along and save things. Such thinking doesn't really exist in African politics nowadays. There aren't these ideas, these populist revolutions of populist ideas that somebody is going to kind of save national politics. Now, kind of one piece of evidence we have is, again, from the World Value Survey, where people are asked whether they support or reject having a strong, unchecked leader. And strikingly, Africa has the highest number of reject after New Zealand and Australia. More than, only slightly, but more than Europe and North America. So people in Africa are skeptical of authority and on a comparative level. Now going to the Afrobarometer.
Soeren, we have one question. Shall we interrupt for a second?
Yes.
We have one question from Panu Putwara, and he asks, how about tolerance of non-religious people?
Of people that don't have a religion?
Correct, yeah.
Yes, that's a good question. We haven't looked at this yet. That's definitely something we should look into. I think there are some questions in the World Value Survey about having a neighbor that doesn't go to church or the mosque or something like that. So we can definitely look at this. And I think a point I want to make is that doesn't necessarily mean Africans are tolerant on all dimensions. We have found, for example, that on the issue of homosexuality, Africans are the least tolerant across the world. So it doesn't mean that it's going to be across the board tolerant, but some good indications that on language, ethnic, and religion so far we found tolerance. But that's a great point.
Okay.
Anything else?
Not so far. No. You can continue.
So then let me give you some more evidence on kind of this skepticism towards authority. So the Afrobarometer survey and the East Asian Barometer have a similar question about feelings towards one-man rule. So whether you strongly approve, disapprove, approve, or strongly approve that there should be one person ruling the country as opposed to having a parliament that kind of has checks and balances on the president or prime minister. And again, in Africa, we can see very high degrees of skepticism of this one-man rule. Over 80% strongly disapprove of this. And in East Asia, that is a lot lower, right? It's less than 70, less than 70 here, and a lot less in the strongly disagree. Now, some other questions from the Afrobarometer that we haven't found comparable data yet in other surveys, but whether the president should be free to act on own or be monitored by the parliament, whether the president must obey the courts and laws. Again, very high skepticism of authority, of kind of one-man rule of presidents. Now, you might say that this could perfectly be because Africa has had a bad experience with governance by presidents over the last 50 years or even longer. And that might be part of why the patterns look the way they are. But we believe that it's not just a fact of that. It is a society that is skeptical of authority. Now, we don't want to say at all that we should expect 10% growth in Africa tomorrow. And we don't want to deny that there are enormous problems of governance and institutions from which Africa suffers. But China suffered from those too, especially before 1978, but even after. And there were huge institutional inadequacies. Ill-defined property rights, no corporate law, no independent judiciary, no accountability in the political system, mass corruptions, all these issues we know existed in China and still to certain degrees exist. But the Chinese experience suggests that if some basic problems can be solved and there's some basic alignment in the social contract of the elites, then these latent assets can come to life and the economy can move. And there were hybrid solutions to many of these problems, for example, township village enterprises. Now, we think that this provides a different way of thinking about African development instead of focusing on kind of the litany of usual suspects. This is kind of a different view. But the usual suspects, bad governance, lack of accountability, corruptions are still important. And some of them certainly need to be addressed. That's no questions. But Africans have a long history of developing hybrid solutions to both economic and political institutional problems. And we need to better understand how we can then tap into these assets that we described once institutional change has started to then start economic growth. Yeah, so I think I'm going to stop here a little bit earlier, but I'm really looking forward to all your feedback to make this a better project.
That's great. Thank you so much, Soeren. Folks, apologies for the technical problem. We had Jim on 15 minutes before, and we just asked Soren to jump in. I think it was 16:05. Before, thank you so much. This was a great presentation. We have one question that I will read to you, and then we will open the floor. I mean, if you can raise your hand, Mike will be able to unmute you. Then the question that came in writing is by an anonymous attendee, and it goes, Africa is cosmopolitan, lots of languages, but they're all Bantu, loosely speaking. Whether to call these languages or dialects is questionable. My impression is that Africa is no more linguistically diverse than Europe, where it's almost all Indo-European. At some point, we defined French and Italian, but that means Parisian and Florentine, with people in Savoy and East somewhere in between. Am I wrong on this?
Do you want me to take it away, or do you want me to?
Yes, because this is the only one who have coming in writing. So, and I don't have the power to unmute people. So that if you raise your hand, Michael will unmute you after you tackle this one.
Okay, thank you. So I think there are two parts of this answer. I mean, I think several Bantu languages are very similar, but there is considerable heterogeneity among the African languages. If you think about in South Africa, for example, Xhosa and Zulu are not the same at all. If you think about in Eastern Congo, Kinyarwanda, Swahili, Lingala, these are the languages that are spoken typically. They are not the same, and they're not mutually understandable if you have language of one or the other. Of course, Kurundi and Kinyarwanda, you can argue whether those are two different languages or dialects. But many languages that you will find in a place are not going to be mutually understandable. And so that's why I would say that languages seems to be the right word and not dialect. If you think about Western Africa and Liberia and Sierra Leone, they are languages from very different strains that are not just kind of Western Bantu that come together. So just on the African languages, I think there's a little bit more diversity than just dialects of Bantu. And then I think the bigger point is that many Africans speak a European language and an African language. Right? So you'd have the former colonial language that is spoken, and then you have the African language. Or you have in Sierra Leone, where you have a Creole that is kind of a Creole English language, and then you'd have your local Mende or something else. So it's not just that Africans speak different Bantu languages, but they often speak a European language, and then one or two African languages, and then we might argue about how similar they are, but I think there's still considerable degrees of diversity.
Thank you.
Great. We have a question from Panu. Panu, I will unmute you now. Can you hear us? We can hear you now.
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So very fascinating talk. Thanks a lot. I wanted to ask about Nigeria, so that I could imagine that one difference between Chile and Nigeria is that in Chile there is a capital in which a lot of the activity is centered, while in Nigeria you have a kind of entrenched division between north and south. And I wonder that when it comes to Nigeria, do you have people coming from same city, different schools, or is it that it's people coming from one province, another province, and so on, and that's why they come also from different schools?
That's a great point. So the political geography might vary a lot by country, and it's true. Chile is a very capital-centric country. Nigeria has kind of three big regions that people talk about. We have kind of also coded up where people are from, and there's again huge diversity. So the president right now is a northerner, but the cabinet is not just northerners. It is very diverse, and that's what we find across kind of African cabinets that we've looked at, that they're very diverse in where people come from. And then even when they come from the same place as in the cabinet of Buhari, they don't go to the same school, which kind of shows us that there's not kind of this local or regional elite. If you contrast this with, for example, Colombia, which also has more regional politics, and cabinets have to have someone from different areas, the big cities. But you would find, we're in the process of coding this up right now, but you would find that people would come from certain regional high schools, regional private schools where the elite goes to. And so we might find a little bit more diversity than in Chile, but still people would go to certain elite private schools. And that we just don't seem to find that in a context of Nigeria that might look a little bit more like Colombia in terms of the political geography, but still no data that we found so far of kind of entrenched political elites. Instead, people seem to move up and down the hierarchy quite easily. And Jim kind of has often talked to kind of prime minister in the Congo, who would say that he doesn't look for ethnicity, he doesn't look for where people come from, he just looks for talented people for the cabinet. And that seems to, we seem to find that across kind of the cabinets we've looked at so far in Africa.
Okay, great. We have a next question by Luca Jacopo. I allow you to talk. Luca, we can hear you now.
Luca, you have to unmute yourself.
Ah, now it works.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, Luca, we can hear you.
Sorry, I was already about 1/4 into my question, so I'm just going to repeat it.
That's
Anyway,
all right.
I'm Luca Uberti from UCL. Very interesting talk, by the way. Thank you very much. It would be foolish to dispute the developmental virtues of tolerance, but I had a few issues about your arguments about authority or skepticism about authority in Africa on the one hand, and also your point about diversity. You seemed to, well, you brought very interesting empirical evidence, actually, which kind of made me change a little bit my priors about Africa, of which I'm not a specialist at all. But you seem to give it for granted that a certain skepticism for authority and diversity are factors that promote development. But I think that there's, I mean, quite a bit of disagreement on these 2 points. I mean, arguably the experience of development in Europe or East Asia are based on state building efforts that were based on the centralization of power. And also about diversity, there's some voices in the literature that that claim that diversity is pro-developmental, others that claim that a high level of diversity reduces trust, yet others say that there's more of a non-linear relationship between diversity and economic success. You kind of gave all of this for granted. So what makes you think that skepticism for authority and a high level of diversity will actually be latent assets rather than latent liabilities which are already out there in the case of Africa?
Yeah. No, I think that those are excellent points, and that's something that I think we have to do a little bit more work on. I wish Jim was here, because that's really right as up his alley in terms of his last book, The Narrow Corridor, which is all about that. It is that you really need the balance between the state and society, and that I think he brings up some examples of Africa, for example, the TIF there, that are very skeptical of authority, and that's a little bit of a liability because they never developed a state that can then do anything. At the other hand, we would argue that having a very, very strong state and no society that can give it a little bit of a resistance, that is also bad for development eventually. You will get a little bit push in the beginning, but eventually society has to catch up and has to kind of put some checks on the state, and otherwise you're going to run into troubles eventually. That's the argument of the book, and I think that is true, that once these institutional first hurdles and they are overcome, and they have to be overcome. That's definitely our argument. You have to build a state that has kind of a developmental approach. That's out of the question. But once you have that, then having a society that can have some checks and balances, that has especially local accountability. That's something that is kind of forgotten, that Africa has very high levels of local accountability to the institutions, that's going to be very beneficial for development. So I see your point. I think we would say that yes, the first until these first institutional problems are solved, they might be seen as a liability, but once you can get started, then it's really an asset.
Okay, that's excellent, Soeren. Thank you so much. We have a few questions now coming in the Q&A facility. I'll try my very best to briefly summarize them.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is by Albert Rodriguez Sala, pointing out that there is data on social mobility on sub-Saharan Africa by Magalhães and Santa Eulalia Lopes that shows higher mobility in sub-Saharan Africa than in the US. I would like to hear your thoughts on that. A second question by Paul Fontanier, specifically on the Nigerian example, asking whether this could be driven by geographical reasons, the president choosing ministers from different regions so that to satisfy everyone. And there are two by an anonymous attendee. The first one is, what are your thoughts on ethnicity sentiment vis-a-vis national sentiment? Do you think that nation building is a requirement for good governance and therefore development?
You said there was a second one? Sorry, the second one I didn't catch now. I was writing down the first question.
Oh, I see.
You can see them in the Q&A
yeah.
functionality, Soeren.
Oh yeah, sorry. Give me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that I.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was okay.
I mean, if you want to answer this.
Okay. Yes. Let me take a step at that. So first, data on social mobility. I think that's great. We haven't come across that study yet, but I'm gonna definitely look at this, and this kind of goes along our argument that social mobility is high, and that is a sign of achievement-based society. I was referencing a World Bank report from a few years ago that argued that social mobility in Africa was low, especially on education mobility. What I would guess the differences to this other study is that they focused a lot on earlier cohorts. So cohorts born in the 60s and 70s have a very low social mobility in Africa, which is mostly due to kind of the lost decades in the 80s and 90s in Africa that they were particularly bad. And then if they when they look at cohorts born in the 90s and 2000s, then education mobility is a lot better. So I'm very happy to hear about this citation. I'm definitely going to have a look at this, because this is just I feel like that bolsters our argument of the first asset. On the geographical reasons, I think that there was kind of, I addressed this a little bit with my answer about kind of Chile and Nigeria, the different geography in looking at Colombia. Now the ethnic sentiment versus national sentiment. My experience in Africa is that this national sentiment has actually been another success story. If you think about countries like the Congo, where I've done a lot of work, which has a range of ethnicities, over 200 different languages spoken, but Congolese national sentiment is very strong. Even though the state building project has been a failure, I think inarguably a failure, the nation building project has been quite a success. And it might make you reevaluate Mobutu a little bit, but Congolese really feel Congolese. They're very proud of the national soccer team, Congolese music, etc. And I found similar things in Nigeria, again, where in Nigeria you would think that they're the Yoruba, they're the Igbo, they're the Hausa, very strong ethnic identities, but also very strong national identities. So I think the issue of national sentiment has been quite of a success story recently, and I think is less of a problem than we thought maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And that doesn't mean that there are no conflicts across ethnicities within a country. I mean, of course they are. But I think that the general national sentiment is there, and enough definitely, I think, to get kind of economic growth started. And again, ethnicity is something that we focus on as political scientists and as economists. But I think we want to think about kind of other assets that actually say that Africa is a diverse place and actually a very tolerant place. It doesn't mean that there are no conflicts, of course. And sorry, and the last question now, I'm kind of looking for this in the So I don't see the last question, but can you remind me?
It was the question by Paul Fontier on the Nigerian example. Beyond this one, right? Could it be that this is true on the Nigerian example? Could it be that this is driven by geographical reasons?
Oh yes,
because
yes.
Nigeria is a fragile state. The
Yes.
president might choose ministers from all different regions to satisfy everyone.
Yeah, I think some of that is going on. There's definitely coalition building going on. But I think overall, even when people then come from the same region, they come from different backgrounds. And again, our kind of anecdotal evidence from the Congo and from other places is that politicians, they do seem to take regions into account, but then they do go for talented people, and they do go for people that are going to be useful for them in the cabinet, and not just, you know, what region you came from.
Okay, great. Then we have one last risen hand by Tim Schleicher. Tim, I unmute you now.
And you have to unmute yourself too.
Can you hear us, Tim? We can't hear you.
You have the right to unmute yourself now. In the microphone, should have a red line across it. If you just click, it will unmute yourself.
Okay.
No. Oh, he's back.
Okay, we don't find him anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there another question? I think Panu raised his hand again. Let's try with him. Panu, can you unmute yourself?
It's only fitting that we started and end the talk with technical difficulties.
Yeah. I can see he's been unmuted. I cannot unmute him, but I can see he's been unmuted.
I'm clicking.
Yes, Panu?
Now we can hear him.
Yes.
Panu? Okay, maybe not.
Sorry, I.
Okay, that works.
Yeah, I wanted to go back into the geography that if comparing African countries and say Latin American countries with similar type of geography, to what extent this would explain the differences?
Thank you. Yeah. So I think so we do think that this kind of achievement-based society would explain a lot of the differences. Part of the reason, you know, could be that that elites are less entrenched, you know, in Africa than Latin America. Latin America has been independent for longer, giving elites more time kind of to establish themselves. Africa elites that came up after independence, even then they were already less entrenched than in Latin America, who oftentimes the people that came up after independence were elites before. That's often due to the colonial experience, because the colonial experience didn't allow Africans to get educated, to really, you know, have a say in the country and, you know, get elite status. And of course, there are some presidents that are now the children of former presidents. There's some ministers that are the children of former presidents and things like that in Africa. That's definitely still going on. But in general, there seems to be more of a talent-based approach, more achievement-based approach, more diversity than what we found in comparable situation in Latin America.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
If there are no further questions, then now do you want to close the seminar then?
Yeah, just thank you very much, everybody, to hang on, and thank you so much, Soeren, for picking up the baton at the very last minute. I mean, it looked technically perfect at 10 to 4, and I guess so. It's a learning curve. Thank you so much. It was a great talk. Thank you, everybody, and I hope to see you again this webinar. Thank you, Dan. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your
Thank you.
feedback.
Bye bye.